We continue. And we continue with this question. Did Paul need to start all over again? Did he need to go all the way back to the beginning and establish credibility with them all over? That's really the that you're going to have to answer. Honestly, in your heart and your mind, do I really need to go back and start all over again? Because if the answer is yes, then there is a lot of room, okay, in which you give your accusers a lot of credibility. Do you hear what I said? There's a lot of room of credibility that you give to your accusers if you're going to have to go back and start all over again. It's amazing. In the world of construction, and I was involved in a lot of construction previously, and so I was a builder. And I used to have to tell the crew this. If you don't have time to do it right the first time, how is it you have time to do it all over again the second time? See, that's fine. You may build something wrong, tear it back down, and build it back up again correctly. The problem is that is not so easy when we're working with people. If you do it right the first time, you don't have to go back and do it again. Notice that Paul, he doesn't even appeal at this point to the miraculous element in his ministry, which have been clearly and repeatedly displayed in Corinth. Now, we're here down at 2 Corinthians in chapter 3, and this, he really doesn't appeal to it, because this is down the line. This is way down the line in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 12. What's down the line? Mm-hmm. The miraculous element of his ministry. He could have just said, listen to me, you've seen all the miracles around me, haven't you? What are you, blind? Deaf? Because the blind was blind, they're no longer blind, or deaf are no longer deaf, and if they were dead, they were raised from the dead. You know, he could have done that, but he didn't. He didn't even appeal to that. He wanted to appeal to their hearts and to their mind and to their conscience. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 12, okay, he mentions this. He says, the signs of a true apostle were performed past tense among you with all perseverance by signs and wonders and miracles. That's the sign of a true apostle. He could have appealed to that much earlier in his argument, but he did not. But the starting point in his defense, it was what? What was it? It was an appeal. Listen to this. It was an appeal to their knowledge of his character. It was an appeal to their knowledge of his character. It's an appeal to your people's knowledge of your character. They knew him. Your people know you. They knew him well. Your people know you well. They had observed his life. Trust me, your people are observing your life. They had seen his godly character firsthand and up close. It's the same with you and I. They knew what he was like from the inside out. To defend himself on that account would be utterly superfluous. It made no sense. Thus, Paul left the question with them. He did not boast of his own virtue. He had no need to do so. So he spends his entire time defending his character. How? By listen to this carefully, by appealing to what they already knew about him. They were not strangers. These were intimate now. Listen to me, Pastor. If you have done your job correctly, the way you are supposed to do it, your people know you. Oh, yes, they do. They know you. They know you more than you realize. So now, let's move on to the second realm, the second phase of the attack. That would be his influence. His influence. So the first attack was on his character. Now we'll look at his influence. Go back to 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 1. Are we beginning to commend ourselves again, or do we need as some letters of commendation to you or from you? See, the second question is just as disarming as the first. Notice that the way the questions were designed. The questions were to disarm his people. Of what? What is it? Is he going to disarm over what? Of all reason? Of the truth? No. He was disarming them of the lie that they had been told, of which apparently at some point in time they bought it. They have bought that lie, okay, line, hook, and sinker. So that's what he's disarming them about. Do we need, as some other epistles, as some others, epistles of commendation to you or letters of commendation from you? Notice this, and this is really crucial right at this particular point here, because now I want to get into this part here, and it just gets a little, it could get almost a little convoluting if you're not careful with it. So I'm going to attempt to be as clear as I can be. Because again, he's speaking in a language that perhaps you and I don't necessarily understand. But he's speaking to an audience that clearly understands what he's saying. So I want to unpack this for you in a way that makes sense. And by the way, teach your people the word, and they'll understand it. Look at this. So now, let's underscore here at the end of verse 1, or do we need as some letters of commendation to you from you? What is he talking about? Well, first we have to understand the language that he's using and the context that he's using and how it was used. Okay? Letters of commendation are useful only when the person is being introduced, is unfamiliar. And we could see this way back in the Old Testament in chapter 2 in the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah needed letters of commendation to go to Jerusalem to rebuild the wall. And turn your Bibles to Nehemiah chapter 2. Just stay with me on this point. What is a letter? What is a letter of commendation? That's the focal point at this point in our conversation. So in Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 7, it says, and Nehemiah is speaking, he says, I said to the king, if it please the king, let letters be given me for the governors of the provinces beyond the river, that they may allow me to pass through until I come to Judah. Now notice what he's saying. If it please the king, let letters be given me for the governors of the provinces beyond the river, that they may allow me to pass through until I come to Judah. Now, those letters were essential to prove his legitimacy. They introduced him where he was previously unknown. They showed that he had the king's support for his project. That's why the letter of commendation was so important. Now, Paul himself, in his life, before becoming a Christian, now this is crucial here, before becoming a Christian, had once sought letters of commendation from where? He had sought them originally for sinister purposes, for evil purposes. According to the book of Acts, turn your Bible to the book of Acts chapter 9. And in the book of Acts in chapter 9, I want you to see this. Saul of Tarsus went to the high priest to get letters of commendation, proving to the people in the synagogues of Damascus that he had the authority to take Christians as prisoners back to Jerusalem. Acts 9, verse 1 and 2. Now Paul, still breathing threats and murder against disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked for letters from him to the synagogues at Damascus to know, so that if he found any belonging to the way, W-A-Y, the way, he's talking about the Christians, both men and women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem as prisoners. Now, Paul also wrote commendation for Phoebe. Remember that? She was a deaconess of the church in Cenchrea. Now, in Romans chapter 16, turn your Bibles to Romans 16:1. Her letter of referral is a permanent part of the biblical record. Because in Romans 16:1 it says, I commend to you our sister Phoebe. This is a letter. Who is a servant of the church which is at Cenchrea. So Phoebe is the one who's actually, she's taking what you and I know today. You know, it's what you and I know as the book of Romans. Okay? That's a letter. Okay? She's taking that letter to the Romans. And so she has an introduction so that she could establish her credibility with them. Now, when the Corinthians sent an offering to meet the needs of the saints in Jerusalem, Paul said he expected a letter of commendation to come from Corinth with the courier who would deliver the gift to Jerusalem. So not only would the courier come, the messenger, the courier would come with the money, the offering, okay, for the saints in Jerusalem, but there would be a letter with that offering. Because it says in 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 3, when I arrive, whomever you may approve, I will send them with letters to carry your gift to Jerusalem. So the letters of commendation are legitimate in their place. Modern job applications often include a request for written references. Churches require such letters for transfers of membership. I know we do. To this day, letters of referral are a common part of everyday life. So when we got people that move into our community, who've left another community because of job placement or whatever the reason is, they come and they want to join our fellowship. They declare that they're born-again Christians, they've been baptized, and blah, 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 blah. And so they will come with a letter of commendation, or will request that from their previous pastorate, their previous church. And I've never had one turned down. I've had people to tell me that they would not recommend them, and then they send a letter why. Okay? So that's a very common practice today. Apparently, when the false teachers originally showed up in Corinth, they had letters of commendation as well. Now, they most likely came to Corinth from Jerusalem. Now, that's the speculation, that's the thought. And you go, well, based on what? Well, give me a moment. In the book of Acts, chapter 15, verse 5, it indicates that the Judaizers, in other words, these are the false teachers who wanted to make circumcision a requirement for salvation, was a sect of Pharisees. It was a sect, S-E-C-T, a sect of Pharisees who had identified with the Jerusalem church. So there's this group that broke away, okay? And we go, well, how do you know that? Well, in Acts chapter 15, verse 5 says, but some of the sect of the Pharisees who had believed stood up saying, it is necessary to circumcise them and to direct them to observe the law of Moses. Now, these men are called believers. No doubt they claim to be Christians, but they have brought to the church the very same kind of legalism to which Jesus condemned the Pharisees. That's what they had done. In the book of Luke, in Luke chapter 11, look at what it says in verse 46. But he said, woe to you lawyers as well, for you weigh men down with burdens hard to bear, while you yourselves will not even touch the burdens with one of your fingers. He called them out as hypocrites. In Acts chapter 15:10. Now, therefore, why do you put God to the test by placing upon the neck of the disciples a yoke which neither our fathers nor we have been able to bear? These were the Judaizers. Okay? Now, so it's believed that these are the type of people who had left Jerusalem and wound up in Corinth. But they went with letters from the church of Jerusalem. Jerusalem itself was a hotbed for that kind of error. And many who taught it had gone out from Jerusalem, from the Jerusalem church to sow, and they went to sow confusion in Gentile churches throughout the empire. That's what they had done. And that's, you can see this, because that was part of the problem in the Jerusalem church. And when they left, okay, you know what happens, right? They spread, okay, that false teaching to other parts of the known world in Christianity. We have that problem today. We have false teachers who leave the United States all the time and have got churches all over the world completely confused. In Acts chapter 15, verse 24, since we have heard that some of our number to whom we gave no instruction, it says, have disturbed you with their words, unsettling your souls. In all likelihood, there was a source of trouble. This was the source of trouble in Corinth. I cannot prove it to you, but in all likelihood, I think that's what happened. It appears, however, that the false teachers had come to Corinth with some pretty impressive credentials, including letters of recommendation, possibly purported to be from officials in the Jerusalem church. And when they first arrived in Corinth, they had pulled out of their satchels, excuse me, they had pulled out of their satchels, okay, their letters of references. And that is undoubtedly what Paul was making reference to in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 1. Go back there. 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 1. Are we beginning to commend ourselves again, or do we need, as some, remember the some, as some, letters of commendation to you or from you? That's what he's making reference to. You see, he left the accusers over here. I'm talking to you, to the church. That's what I want to talk to. See, the false teachers had come into the Corinthian church as intruders, but they sought and found entrance because they evidently they did have impressive documents addressed specifically to the church at Corinth. That's where you get the phrase, to you. They had come with an agenda and they had planned well. I remember, and you go, well, that can't be. Well, no, I'm in California. I'm in Los Angeles, California. In fact, our church is less than 3 miles away from the Los Angeles International Airport. And so we've had pastors who have flown in with letters of commendation, a very impressive letterhead, impressive letters, and blah, 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 blah. But I sit down and I talk to these guys, and I can tell you within 3, 4 to 5 minutes, okay, something is afoot. Something is wrong. Notice that Paul also refers to the letters of commendation from you. Okay? I want you to, from you. Perhaps the false teachers had already sought and obtained references from the church at Corinth to give them further credibility when they took their errors elsewhere. So, somewhere along the line, the church at Corinth also gave these people letters as they moved up further north, up into Macedonia and to the other churches. That was how such heretics plied their trade. That's how they trade. That's how they applied their trade. That's how they applied it. This is how they were able to do what they were able to do. Okay? They were always itinerant. They were always itinerant. In other words, itinerant. They were going from place to place to place to place. Okay? They could not settle for long in one place. Well, that became obvious because their lives were corrupt. That's the reason why they couldn't settle in one place for very long. They were not truly regenerate. Sooner or later, the real character of their lives would manifest itself because it has to manifest itself. So they stayed on the move, but they were in Corinth long enough to confuse and tear up the church and long enough to get some letters of commendation from the Corinthians themselves. So Paul was asking them, am I in the same boat as them? Do I need to bring a letter of recommendation to you? And do I need a letter of recommendation from you so I can go on to Macedonia or somewhere else? Do I need references either for you or from you? That's the question that Paul has presented to them as he mounts this defense in verse 1. So the thought was the thought was ludicrous. It was insanity. Paul's authenticity was evident, not only from his own life, but also from his influence in the lives of the Corinthians. Remember, they're attacking his influence now. First it was his character, now it's his influence. That's what we're talking about. They've attacked his influence. You want a letter, he asked? I'll give you a letter. Look what he says, 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 2 and 3. He says, you are our letter, written in our hearts, known and read by all men, being manifested that you are a letter of Christ, cared for by us, not written with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on the tablets of human hearts. Let me ask you a question. Can you make that same statement in your church? Can you make that same statement? Okay. Do you really need letters? Do you have to be reintroduced all over again? Because if that is true, then I can say this to you safely. Okay? You have failed miserably in your leadership. You have failed miserably in your leadership. If your own church needs a letter about you, and you've been the leader there for a long time, something is profoundly wrong.